And now, as we move forward with the conference, we have 3 dynamic thematic sessions lined up, each designed to provide different perspectives on the topic of today's conference. These sessions will provide a platform for in-depth discussions, exchange of ideas, and exploration of practical approaches to the challenges and opportunities we face in today's democratic world. The first session will delve into the political and institutional aspects of our topic. It will feature 2 concise and insightful interventions, followed by a distinguished ministerial panel. Our first intervention, titled The European Parliament Report and Resolution on the Implementation of Citizenship Education Actions, will be delivered by Mr. Domènec Ruiz Devesa. Mr. Ruiz Devesa is a member of the European Parliament and rapporteur of the European Parliament's report on the implementation of citizenship education actions. Mr. Ruiz, the floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias, en primer lugar, a la Presidencia Española del Consejo de la Unión Europea y a su Ministerio de Educación, a la ministra Pilar Alegría, al secretario de Estado, José Manuel Barcendón, por la oportunidad de participar en este importante encuentro que, como se ha dicho, lo ha dicho también el amigo de la Comisión Europea, Stefaan, no es un one-off, sino que se está trabajando durante distintos encuentros y ocasiones y, desde luego, yo celebro poder hacerlo, participar para trasladar en 15 minutos la visión del Parlamento Europeo sobre la cuestión. Y I like to congratulate also the Spanish presidency for having made, I will say, a priority of the program presidency, this topic of European citizenship education and European values education. And I think, as it has been, I will say, already implied by José Manuel and Stefaan, this is a strategic topic. I think in the past we have, or it has been tended to see this topic a bit of a soft topic, not intangible, but soft, and something of secondary importance. And here I will say we are facing a very big contradiction because there is a strong connection, and also Professor Adela Cortina, in her magnificent keynote speech, the relationship between citizenship and education is so important. Is it really possible to exercise, to be a citizen without being educated to be a citizen? That's the big question of her conference, and also it has been highlighted by Stefaan. So the European citizenship, this is something that no one is challenging because it's in existence legally and constitutionally. It's part of the treaty since 1992, since the Maastricht Treaty. But at the same time, there is no competency or at least a strong legal base by the European Union to act in the field of education for European citizenship. This is a big contradiction in a way. So that means, in practice, that if a member state chooses not to talk about European citizenship in their education system, and if the media of a given member state, public media or private media, also choose not to talk about European citizenship, so let's say no one in that, no agent in that member state does this job, this member state is not violating any obligation. as I understand it, legally or technically speaking, towards the European Union. So we cannot take this member state to the Court of Justice. I'm not saying that this should be the way, but it's a big contradiction, because this is a political community, because we have European citizenship. It's not just a common market. So how do we come out of this contradiction? Well, in accordance to the common rules, of course, we have to do that by way of cooperation among the member states, by way of recommendations from the European Commission, the positions of the European Parliament. And I think the presidency, the Spanish presidency, can provide a big impulse going forward in this topic, and I'm very much, and the European Parliament is very much looking forward to the conclusions of your Council in November, in which we expect that we can have some, as this was mentioned also by José Manuel Barcendon, concrete proposals to move forward, because I think we all agree that we need to do more. And we need to do more because we have data about the lack of knowledge of European institutions, the history of the institutions, and what entails to be a European citizen. It is true that we will need more. This will be the first, maybe, proposal for the future. We need better and more complete indicators about the situation. But what we have already points to not a good situation. So we have, according to the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, that 50% of the students report not having opportunities to learn about Europe in school. So 1 in 2. That's a big gap. Huh? And this is only self-report. This is not a test, a knowledge-based test. Huh? This is what the students self-report themselves. Taking the broadest definition of citizenship education, there is a predominant national focus also, with the international dimensions, not only European, but also the international dimension or global dimension of citizenship, secondary or absent. Of course, there are high variations across member states regarding the time devoted to the subject. The modes of teaching citizenship education also vary substantially. And the latest data available, which is from 2017, so a while back, the Commission is fully aware, says that half of the countries did not have in place regulations or recommendations about citizenship education competencies in the initial teacher education programs. And of course, this is particularly important or particularly lacking when it regards the European dimension. Now, there has been a lot of talk in the past in the European Union. I'm sure you have heard before the expression democratic deficit of the European Union. Well, it is true that we have still things to do in terms of having a more democratic union. Let's think, of course, of the powers of the Parliament when it comes to legislative initiative, or the power to co-decide on resources, taxation, and so on, but this takes me to a different topic. But I think more important even than whatever democratic deficit is remaining in the European Union is the knowledge deficit. And this is precisely knowledge, in this case, about EU citizenship and education or civic education in general. So what can we do concretely just to move to and to be in keeping with the time? Well, as I mentioned before, I think we need to start better indicators, better data. We have been asking in our report, which is now I think 1 year old from last year, but we are a bit in a, I mean, we have been already asking about that, but since the Eurobarometer is in between the Parliament and the Commission, it's not clear when you go to one, no, you have to, for this you have to talk to the Parliament, then there's not, for this you have to go to the Commission, so it's a bit unclear. But what we are asking in the report is that we believe we need a Eurobarometer on knowledge of EU, because self-reporting it's okay, but we don't think it's sufficient or precise. So we need a questionnaire by the Eurobarometer that asks concretely to citizens what do they know about the EU. I think this is very important. Secondly, and again, I take a bit also for the sake of time for granted why we need that, not only because a European citizenship that is not educated about is not actionable, but, and this has been mentioned by Stefaan as well, that we are living in a world of the disinformation, of propaganda, of also, to some extent, rising Euroscepticism, which, of course, we are not saying that one has to be pro-European, obviously not, but if you want to be Eurosceptic, at least this has to be on the basis of proper information, on the basis of what is reality, not on the basis of disinformation or propaganda or mischaracterization of what the EU is about, their origins, their values, the benefits of being an EU citizen, and so on and so forth. So, how can we make this more concrete in the basis of the current treaties? Well, the Conference on the Future of Europe, which has been mentioned, and is a terminology that the Secretary of State has recalled, talks about providing minimum standard of EU education or knowledge of EU in all member states. And this seems like a sensible thing to do. And we are proposing particularly the possibility of using the Erasmus Plus programs and also the European Solidarity Corps and other mobility programs and training opportunities, also those coming from the European Social Fund, to offer to the young people mostly benefiting from these programs, and we're talking of hundreds of thousands of people across Europe, as you know, to follow an online module course of a few hours on knowledge about the EU. We think this is very practical. This is systemic because we have a bit too much, and we have mentioned this to the Commission a number of times, we have been too much, I believe, being stuck in the paradigm of exchange of best practices, which of course is always welcome, but if we really believe this is important, this is strategic for the future of the Union and for the cohesion of our political community, then we need a systemic approach. If all people, young people benefiting from Erasmus, Solidarity Corps and so on, can access an online module on knowledge about the EU upon starting their mobility opportunity, this really has a systemic effect. And this is not expensive, and this is practical. Now, beyond that, we have the possibility, which we know is more controversial, which is the question of the common curriculum. Of course, the EU doesn't have the competency to establish a curriculum, but we have been arguing that, of course, in conjunction with the member states, the Commission and experts and the community and so on, the Commission could develop a demonstrative curriculum on EU citizenship that can be adopted on a voluntary basis for the member states more committed to move forward in this topic. And finally, we have the question of what can we do in the event of a reform of the treaties. And this is something that we also mentioned in our report, and it was also mentioned in the, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the Conference on the Future of Europe, that we can envision a shared competency, but in a very, of course, targeted, and I will even call chirurgical way on the field of EU citizenship. Of course, we cannot envision a shared competency for any other subject of the curriculum. I don't think we are asking for the institutions to decide how much physics or language or mathematics are taught in the member states. But we believe that if the member states are teaching about EU citizenship, as we believe we have to further encourage, because they should, the institutions should have an input in that process. And once again, it will be very contradictory, or it is actually contradictory, that the institutions cannot have an input on how member states teach about EU citizenship. I think this doesn't require further elaboration on my part. My time is up, so thanks again for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ruiz, for your instructive presentation. I would just like to add that on the 28th November, we will have new data on citizenship education with the study ICCS, which has been co-funded by the European Commission. And thanks to that, and we'll have data from Spain. And on the 22nd February, we'll have the data from the European module. So we're looking forward to improving those percentages since 2017. And now we move on to our second intervention, in which we have an interesting presentation titled A Values-Based European Education Area, which will be delivered by Mr. Stefaan Hermans from the European Commission. And after his words, Mr. Hermans will also take the role of moderator for the upcoming ministerial panel. So, Mr. Hermans, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning again, and I will not repeat what I said before now, because I think we're a little bit behind schedule. I'll do my best to catch up, but I don't promise you anything. I've been asked to speak about a values-based European education area. And we even discussed, should the title actually be a common European values-based European education area? And I want to put my foot right immediately into the middle of this, and that is in the conversation on who should be deciding on what and what exactly should be taught and how should we be doing it. And I think this is the point also made by Mr. Ruiz Devesa. And let's be clear on this. No one in the EU, in her or his right mind, would challenge that there are very specific national, subnational characteristics, features, and values that we want to treasure. Okay? That's also part of living in a pluralist society. And no one would challenge that education has a key role to share and spread them. And there's also a good reason why the European motto is unity in diversity, right? But cherishing these values at the national, subnational level and promoting them and practicing them, it does not oppose having common European values or European democratic citizenship. There's no opposition there. Because after all, within the European Union, we are supranational. Some will even say we have parts which are federal in nature. That's why we also have a European citizenship. That's why we have a directly elected European Parliament that has the power to pass legislations. So that's unique in the world, right, of what we have. And therefore, it makes perfect sense when you speak about the values-based education and European education area, that we also have common, shared values that we have. There's no opposition, the way I would like to present it. Because we have it already in the treaty. Article 2 of the Treaty of on the EU is very clear. There's a respect for human dignity. But let's be clear, bullying is not part of that, okay? Bullying is not part of that. It's a question of freedom. It's a value of freedom, of democracy, of equality, of the rule of law, that we're all equal in front of the law, and that the law is equally applicable to everyone. that there is respect for human rights, including for the rights of persons belonging to minorities. So it is clearly marked already there, and I don't think anyone within any member state, because every member state has signed up to this, would find this contradictory, those European values, with also values that exist at the national level. But we all face challenges, right? I mean, that's part of being human. That's being part of living together. Climate change, socioeconomic inequality, I can go on for a long time. But what matters, I think, is in the way we respond to those challenges and the way in which, within our political systems, we also take into account and pay attention to the concerns of our citizens, of all our citizens. That we are ready to listen, that we are ready to go into dialogue, that we take into account that there are various values, specific interests, perspectives that have to be taken into consideration. But this approach is also being challenged. We have the rise of populist movements, growing polarization, attacks on democratic processes, very often creating environments of fear rather than environments of a willingness to cooperate with one another. And as we know, fear and pessimism, these are not good recipes, not for dealing with the future, and certainly also not for dealing with the present. So within the European Union and within the member states of the European Union, we need active citizens, engaged citizens, empowered citizens. And we need to find our capacity continuously renew trust in our democratic solutions. So that's also why we need to fight for fake news. We prevent those echo chambers of disinformation that strengthen those messages that are based on illusions and not in facts. And to reinvigorate trust, it matters to teach critical thinking in schools. And that's also what teachers believe. So we need to give people a voice. So we need certainly give young people a voice in this. But it's not always easy, no? Because how do we balance transmitting norms, values, and virtues to which students are expected to adhere, while at the same time expecting that critical reflection and active participation in society? How do you teach about respecting diversity between equality of all and freedom of each? So these are not that easy as a question. So we had a survey in spring this year through the European School Education Platform. So we asked stakeholders about their views on citizenship education. Most of respondents were teachers, and they identified knowledge of democratic values and practices and principles, but particularly also the critical thinking I was referring to, the media literacy, as well as an understanding of the cultural diversity as necessary for teaching citizenship education. So that's what teachers reported. And in their replies, they also said the best way to teach is to involve pupils, that they can practice it, that they can be engaged. And it's also important that there is a basic understanding of the EU, because we are a democratic society and we are an EU that also legislates, right, with a parliament. So different member states, through their national citizenship education strategies and related curriculum reforms, search for the right way to teach citizenship education. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about this here in the panel in a moment. But also, different EU institutions are supporting the citizenship education. Mr. Ruiz Devesa was making reference to it, but we also, the Parliament also has the European Parliament Ambassador School Program, Euroscola, so actually encouraging pupils to participate in all those processes. Also, at the level of the European Commission, we do have a number of activities that we support. And that we support within this European education area, which is values-based, and I would even dare to say we also work a lot on those common European values for this European education area. So this is very much bottom-up. It comes from the community. And within this, we do have a working group. It sounds very bureaucratic, but it is actually extremely practical because it brings together representatives of the member states with experts, with people from academia, so those who are in the know and those who do it, okay? And they come from different member states and even beyond because we are interested in learning from one another, of exchanging and also looking for common denominator in what we are doing. So quite some activities have been taking place recently, including an event that took place here in Spain in the spring, peer learning activity, with the State Secretary, I think, referred to earlier already, which I think, as well as the informal council in Zaragoza, also had this great benefit that you took everyone involved into the classroom, with the teacher, with the pupils, and no surprise, they discuss with one another. They have disagreements with one another, but they also come to a common message that they want to share, which I think is part of the essence of what we're talking about here as well. So within this group, we just published, but we published on behalf of the group as the European Commission, an issue paper. I'm just picking up a few elements. Teaching about citizenship for teachers, it's not easy. It's not easy. Because if you speak about values, if you speak about citizenship, you will be confronted with rather controversial issues. That's the very essence of it as well, that you discuss those. The role of the parents, the local community, that may have very outspoken ideas, and how do you engage them in that, and how do you still treat it? So another element that clearly comes out of this issue paper, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to dig into this also in the panel, is that just teaching it as a specific subject is not necessarily enough. It also has to be cross-curriculum. So, I mean, how do you mix this over the lifetime of spending time in school? That you have those different types of opportunities. And also an element that came out is on the importance on the origins and the functioning of the EU. So these are just a few elements that I wanted to mention, and I would recommend you, as much as to read the report of Mr. Ruiz Devesa, also to have a look at the issues paper, and you will see there's quite some matching going on there as well. Very briefly, I also want to mention something that in a bottom-up approach, encouraging approach, for projects that are funded by the European Commission. For instance, we have the Jean Monnet activities, where we have had, next year, for 35 years, teaching about the EU in higher education. We have now also opened this up to primary and secondary education. But on top of that, we have also tried to bring together schools and teaching colleges, particularly to engage into the subject of teaching about the European Union and this European dimension that comes in. We also have, more broadly, the Erasmus Plus Teacher Academies. We have the e-twinning platform, European Solidarity Corps, Discover EU, specific activities within the sphere of youth, and also sports, quite important. So this is what I just wanted to mention as also a response of what we can do within the competence that has been attributed to us, and really to engage the community to come forward with projects that actually suit them within this framework. So once again, thanks very much for putting this item so prominently on the agenda, and we're actually looking forward also taking some of the messages of this into the Council conclusions in November. So thank you very much indeed for this. All right, so sorry, you have to stuck with me, but I won't say very much anymore, apart from first inviting to the stage Minister da Costa. He is the Portuguese Minister for Education and a long experience of negotiating and dialoguing and convincing, being persuasive on the importance of citizenship education in Portugal, but actually as also a very strong defender at the level of the European Union. Please, Minister. We also have the privilege of having, from France, a chief inspector, so the one who's feared by many teachers and adored by certain others, if I can say so. So Caroline Pascal, so the head of the inspectorate in France and specialist in Spanish. So thank you for being with us. And then we also have the State Secretary, José Manuel. Please, if you also can join us here on the stage, please have a seat. So we have 35 minutes. And after that, Carmen will take some time for questions coming from you, from the audience, for anyone who's on stage right now and will be on stage at the moment that Carmen takes over, okay? So you will have time to ask questions to each of everyone who has been on stage and will be on stage. I'll stand here for a second. And I actually want to start one word of introduction, I think from the strong message that we also have heard from the professor, Adela Cortina, where she said, those common values, they certainly don't stand in the way of different practices. Because this is actually the strength of a pluralist society where there is space for each and everyone. So this is where we want to start from. And this is also what we will be discussing. 3 different cases, 3 different member states within the European Union, but also with their specificity. And what we also will be discussing is the role of the curriculum. It's a national competence, but nationally you also determine and decide on what you do on those competence. So I will start immediately with turning to Minister da Costa with the first question, and that is related to the experience that you have been building up on the National Education Strategy for Citizenship, where you also have this unique blend of doing different sorts of approaches, cross-curriculum, specific, through the different layers or the different levels that you go through the education system. And my question immediately is, what are the strengths in terms of being effective of the approach that you have engaged in Portugal? Minister.
Thank you, Stefan. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to first thank my dear friend, Secretary of State, on his behalf also Minister Pilar Alegria, for this initiative, for putting this important topic on the agenda, and also congratulate the whole organization, in particular my friend Carmen. She's the best. And of course, with my other colleagues of this panel. So going straight to the point, one of the strengths, I think, is to be very firm about the role of citizenship education in the community. I often say school is one of the only places in the world where we obliged citizens to go. So we have the responsibility of saying, if I force you to go there, I'm bound to give you some decent and full service, because it's compulsory, it's obligatory. And when we think of the mission of school, there can be different views. One is to say school is a place where you're going to be instructed about very technical things and the rest is left for outside school. Or you can have a view on education which says school is a place where you form human beings. And then all the parts of the human being goes to school. The brain, the emotions, the body, but also the values, the beliefs, everything that makes us complete. And so our first position was to build a curriculum based on 3 pillars. One is a student profile where dimensions like creative thinking, problem resolution, aesthetic and artistic sensitivity are important keys, competences to be developed throughout the 12 years of schooling plus the 3 years of preschool. The second one is a new view on inclusive education, taking the step from integration into inclusion, and I don't have the time to go deeper on this. And the third one is this national strategy for citizenship education. And why did we want, by saying that this is one of the pillars, what we're saying is that we are committed to a strong statement, which is to say citizenship education has the same importance in the curriculum as mathematics, chemistry, geography, physics, and it's not a side dish on the curriculum. And so one of the strengths is to have this organization, as you mentioned. On the one hand, we had to identify the topics for the citizenship education, and this was a difficult part. I will go back to this. But also to be very firm about this. If the big challenges that we face are the sustainable development of our planet, fighting populism and hate speech, fighting fake news, knowing more about human rights, preserving democracy, then these topics have to be there. And they need knowledge. I cannot be an activist or engage on sustainability if I don't know how to evaluate the loads of information that appear on my YouTube channel. Because digitalization brings lots of information, but this does not mean lots of knowledge. So citizenship is also about knowledge. And there is not one subject for fighting homophobia or for fighting the pseudoscience attached to environmental education. You need a bit of everything. You need to know science, you need to know ethics, you need to know history, and that's why this cross-curriculum dimension and granting space for it in the curriculum are complementary.
Thank you very much, Minister. I turn now to Caroline Pascal. In France, also a long experience. My question to you is particularly on the change over time and how to deal with new situations and how to adapt. And particularly, can you enlighten us also a bit on how to deal then with increasingly sensitive issues?
Gracias. Ante todo, también quiero agradecerles la invitación. Y primero, personalmente, porque siempre es un placer estar en Madrid, pero también institucionalmente, porque nuestro nuevo ministro francés de Educación, Gabriel Attal, que hubiera querido estar aquí con ustedes, señor ministros, ha marcado su primera vuelta al cole, si puedo decirlo así, con unos pasos decisivos sobre esos temas. Son claros señales del interés que tenemos por la educación a la ciudadanía que dio el ministro con dos medidas muy fuertes, la de la lucha contra el acoso escolar, que es manera también de promover igualdad, no discriminación, etc., y hasta empatía y compasión, tal como la profesora Cortina lo dijo antes, y la defensa de la laicidad, que también fue uno de esos de sus primeras medidas importantes. El otro punto que quería desarrollar es que también se dijo por la mañana lo de las amenazas y hasta de los ataques contra los valores comunes que son los nuestros a través, evidentemente, de la guerra en Ucrania, pero también en Francia unos momentos de crisis cruciales importantes como los atentados de Bataclan en 2015 o como el asesinato del profesor Samuel Paty en 2020, fueron unos momentos decisivos para reflexionar sobre la educación a la ciudadanía y sobre nuestros currículum sobre este punto. La semana pasada ya el ministro habló en Estrasburgo sobre ese tema ante sus homólogos y anunció la revisión nueva de nuestro programa de educación moral y cívica y una duplicación de su horario, lo que no es poco dentro del horario de los alumnos. Y eso para que pueda adaptarse mejor a los problemas candentes de la sociedad y consolidar su impacto en la educación de los jóvenes. Ese currículum promueve los valores de la República Francesa y más ampliamente de los de la democracia y de los valores comunes que tenemos en Europa, que se basan ante todo en la dignidad humana, los derechos humanos, la lucha contra toda forma de discriminación y, para nuestro país particularmente, esa defensa de la laicidad, que es un tema muy fuerte en nuestro país. En Francia, esta educación no es solo, y lo dijo también el señor ministro, no es solo una educación, sino realmente una enseñanza con un programa, con una evaluación y hasta con un horario dedicados. Se construye sobre 4 pilares que contestan, que responden a las interrogaciones ya visto por la mañana. Expresión de la sensibilidad y opiniones, respeto a los demás. Y eso para crear las condiciones del diálogo, crear las condiciones de respeto entre todos. Normas y derecho, para comprender también la importancia del derecho, incluido la cuestión de la laicidad y el funcionamiento de las instituciones tanto francesas como europeas. Reflexión y discernimiento para identificar los valores en juego y estar bien informada en esta sociedad digital, como ya lo dijimos. Responsabilidad, sentido del compromiso e iniciativa es el 4º pilar de esa educación, porque la educación a la ciudadanía también pasa por el compromiso. Y en cuanto al método, es el de la pedagogía activa, ya lo dijimos todos también, que pone en práctica la transmisión de los valores a partir de situaciones reales, organizando debates e implicando más a los alumnos. Tenemos para eso varios ámbitos para hacerlo, lo que llamamos nosotros las clases engagées, clases comprometidas, que permiten a los alumnos un servicio cívico en su sentido más amplio, también en instancias como los delegados de clase, los ecodelegados, etc. Y hasta con esta forma de servicio nacional universal que está poniéndose que se está implantando actualmente y que permite también un servicio cívico universal y no solo voluntario. Y eso porque somos conscientes de que esa enseñanza no puede solo enseñarse, si puedo decir, no se puede imponer, sino que se tiene que vivir y compartiendo valores comunes, compartiendo experiencias comunes, que es para mostrar, como lo dijo también la profesora, que lo que nos une es más importante que los que nos separan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll move on immediately to the State Secretary, because also in Spain, you have gone through quite some important experience, a lot of work being invested in this, also on the organic law on education, civic, ethical values. So, what are the essential features? What are the unique aspects that we see in Spain? State Secretary, please.
Sí, ante todo, pues mostrar mi satisfacción por el privilegio de compartir pues este pequeño debate con representantes, altos representantes de 2 países de los cuales en nuestra reforma educativa pues hemos aprendido mucho. Recuerdo pues, está aquí también mi directora general, que no hace mucho estuvimos en Valencia Dominio, pues intercambiando ideas sobre temas curriculares y vimos el paralelismo. Incluso Portugal iba más avanzado que España en algunas cosas y, bueno, para mí siempre es la oportunidad de aprender y compartir también con una inspectora general de Francia, que somos colegas de alguna manera, porque yo también soy inspector de educación, y sabemos que tenemos una visión particular y un apasionamiento muy especial por la educación. Por tanto, perdóname esta breve introducción, pero tenía que mostrar esta satisfacción. Con respecto a cómo hemos abordado en España este tema, bueno, yo creo que sería importante empezar por decir lo que no hemos pretendido. Y no hemos pretendido, a la hora de introducir valores, a la hora de introducir la ciudadanía, cuando nosotros hacemos una reforma educativa, hemos apostado por una reforma educativa sistémica, es decir, que afecta a la globalidad, impregna a la totalidad del sistema. Por lo tanto, no solo va a afectar a los contenidos curriculares, sino que la pretensión es que esa reforma afecte también a la manera de vivir, de trabajar, de compartir y de participar en los centros educativos. Obviamente, si estamos hablando de valores ciudadanos, de valores de participación, de ciudadanía democrática, debemos empezar por lo que es en conjunto el centro educativo. Y a partir de ahí construimos currículum, construimos conocimiento. Nuestro currículum es competencial, de entrada, es decir, hemos pensado que los valores no basta con estudiarlos en los libros, no basta, es decir, los valores no se aprenden solos, sino que los valores se practican. Y por tanto, cuando estamos hablando de introducir valores de ciudadanía, de democracia, pues hay que empezar también por orientarla hacia la práctica. También pensamos que esto debe ser transversal. Es decir, podemos obviar cuando estamos hablando de matemáticas o cuando estamos hablando de historia o cuando estamos hablando de latín, podemos obviar esos valores, podemos limitarnos a lo más estrictamente académico de cada materia y no pensar que de alguna manera el conjunto del currículum es lo que orienta hacia lo que va a ser en el futuro nuestra manera de vivir globalmente, porque no vivimos de manera parcelada, no vivimos por asignaturas, sino que vivimos globalmente y por tanto esos valores tienen que atravesar de manera transversal, digo, el currículum, y el profesorado debe trabajar también cooperativamente a la hora de implementar esos valores. Queríamos decir que también no podemos volver la vista atrás a qué pasa fuera de las puertas de nuestros centros educativos. Esos valores tienen que ser adaptativos a lo que está ocurriendo en nuestro entorno social o si no se quedarían rápidamente desfasados. Y por último, porque sobre esto surgen muchas controversias y yo creo haberlo comentado también contigo en alguna ocasión, esto no es adoctrinamiento, es justamente lo contrario. Porque os voy a poner un mero ejemplo. Cuando nosotros hablamos de igualdad de género en las aulas, estamos adoctrinando, como se dice, desde algunas voces que yo creo que han perdido el sentido común. Pues no, porque lo que estamos haciendo es precisamente combatiendo el adoctrinamiento machista que hemos tenido en nuestra sociedad durante generaciones. Es decir, estamos combatiendo el adoctrinamiento que había para hacer espíritus más libres, mentes más críticas y, por supuesto, en diálogo, en debate, de tal manera que podamos escapar también a los falsos mensajes. Y prometí ser breve, yo creo que lo voy a dejar aquí. Bueno, me gustaría hablar más, pero bueno, sería abusar porque yo también tuve la intervención inicial. Muchas gracias.
So far, if I may, citizenship education is as important as learning language or math or chemistry. But when you teach about this is not something fluffy, okay? It's not something awkward, strange, abstract. It's something very concrete. But the State Secretary came already to an issue which I would like to hear the view of the Minister from Portugal on, and that's about how do you build a consensus? How do you get minds aligned and build a majority to actually take that move on working on the curriculum, making change at the national level? Minister?
Yeah, thank you. The first step is not to take consensus for unanimity. We in Portugal had the same experience as the State Secretary mentioned. We had strong opposition to citizenship education, always about the same topics. It's gender equality, it's multiculturalism, and sometimes even environmental education by those who think that climate change is an opinion and not a fact. So the best way to establish a consensus is to debate, is to promote debate, is to promote discussion about this. And also, I'm going to say something that is polemic in some countries, but there are some movements, especially those movements that are against the presence of citizenship education in the curriculum, that try to stand for what they call an ideology-free education. And it's very clear that that doesn't exist. That does not exist. When we say that education is compulsory, this is an ideological statement. When we say that we want inclusive education, this is an ideological statement. When we want, like we're doing at the Council of Europe, a multi-perspectivity approach to the teaching of history, this is an ideological statement. So, like José Manuel said, when we say we see in our countries that domestic violence, aggression to women, homophobia, racism is still a reality, fighting it through education is also an ideological statement. But it is also an ideological statement to believe that there is ideology-free education, because that's the best way to say we are going to perpetuate behaviors, attitudes that are at odds with our European and national values, with our European agreements, with our national constitutions. So to say that women have the same rights as men, that no one should be discriminated by sexual orientation, this is to say that we are committed to break cycles of violence. Normally, for instance, taking domestic violence, children of offenders become offenders, and there is some place where we have to break the cycle, and the best place is school. So, just to conclude, the consensus is established by stating very clearly what we are going after, and also by, like José Manuel said, by eradicating that idea that we are indoctrinating. No, what we want through citizenship education is to provide knowledge. Many people don't know the very basic data on, for instance, suicidal attempts because of homophobia in teenagers. So this data have to be presented so that students can make their options based upon debate and knowledge, and not based on whatever we read on TikTok.
The one in the middle is the teacher, right? The teacher is the one who has the difficult task to translate the policy into the classroom, has to face the parents and the rest of the community that sometimes may come with it. Caroline Pascal, I wanted to come to you on this, also from the perspective of the teacher, the support you can give to the teacher, the expectation of the teacher. So please.
Sí, es evidente que son temas delicados ya lo dijimos, en cuanto a lo que tocamos hasta en lo más íntimo, más individual de los alumnos. Y por eso la figura del profesor es tan importante, su su función y hasta su discurso. Por eso, voy a ir directamente al grano porque bien vemos que el tiempo pasa. Tuvimos en Francia una decisión muy fuerte de formación, de un plan de formación masivo a todos los profesores y hasta a todos los personales de los institutos y de las escuelas para permitir a esos profesores y a otros de resistir o de combatir a todos los argumentos que vienen normalmente por parte de los alumnos y hasta de las familias, volveré sobre este tema, contra una forma de adoctrinamiento tal como se puede considerar. Así, Francia ha decidido este plan de formación masivo y desde septiembre de 2021 ya 300.000 empleados han sido formados. Nuestro ministerio va a continuar en ese ritmo que otra vez generó el asesinato de Samuel Paty y de la dificultad que tuvo con ese tema de la laicidad, con ese tema de los valores comunes y de hacer participar toda la clase a esa voluntad común, a ese objetivo de compartir valores comunes. También se ha hecho un esfuerzo particular sobre la formación inicial de los nuevos profesores que reclutamos en una prueba oral que viene a evaluar la capacidad de cada candidato para transmitir esos valores democráticos, pero también para desarrollar estrategias educativas cuando se plantean cuestiones delicadas en su enseñanza, en historia, en ciencias de la vida y la tierra, sobre las cuestiones de la transición climática, pero también del aborto, pero también de las cuestiones de género, etc. Y en el ámbito más amplio de la vida escolar, con todas las cuestiones también pendientes acerca de uniforme o no uniforme, etcétera, etcétera. Por último, había otras cosas, pero lo más importante también que me parece en estos últimos momentos en nuestras políticas es montar proyectos y acciones colectivos en las escuelas y multiplicar las campañas de sensibilización. En efecto, no solo hay que implicar al mundo educativo, que puede mucho pero que no puede todo, ya lo sabemos, sino hacer de la defensa de los valores democráticos y europeos un objetivo compartido por todos los ciudadanos y por los padres y las familias. Se educa a los jóvenes sobre esos temas en condiciones tanto más serenas cuanto que cuenta con el apoyo de la nación y de la unidad de los adultos, lo que no siempre es una realidad. Así, por ejemplo, en Francia, y acabaré con esto, creamos equipos, valores de la República, presentes en cada autoridad educativa para venir en apoyo de los profesores en caso de conflicto o litigio, que también reciben formación ellos y trabajan con los otros servicios públicos, policía, justicia, etc. Así que y las familias en último término. Así que los profesores nunca están solos sobre estos temas.
So don't leave the teacher alone with it, right? They're more into this educational community, and I come to the State Secretary of Spain now again, and particularly also on the participation of students, the broader educational community also within this, because this is where the delivery happens, that's where also the take-on happens. So can you share your thoughts on that, State Secretary?
Sí, bueno, lo primero decir sobre la participación en general de la comunidad educativa. Para nosotros es un imperativo constitucional. Está recogido en el artículo 27 de nuestra Constitución el imperativo de que la educación debe ser participada. Y debe ser participada en dos planos, o quizá en dos niveles. En un apartado de ese artículo habla de la programación general de la educación y, por tanto, estamos hablando en términos muy globales, en términos superiores, pero también en otro apartado de la Constitución pues habla del control que la comunidad educativa debe tener sobre la vida de los centros, lo que hacen los centros educativos, sus programaciones, incluso sus finanzas. Estamos hablando, entonces, de varios planos de participación, en todas presentes, desde luego, el alumnado. Hay, y tenemos hoy aquí presente a la presidenta del Consejo Escolar del Estado, Encarna Cuenca, hay un consejo escolar participado, creo que recordar que son 107 miembros, ahí están todos los sectores de la comunidad educativa, están las asociaciones de padres y madres, están los sindicatos de enseñanza, están las asociaciones de alumnos, figuras de reconocido prestigio. Bueno, pues ese órgano el gobierno tiene obligación de poner en su conocimiento y de consultar pues todas las normas que se van sacando. Tengo que decir que además en los últimos años es un órgano, muy probablemente gracias a la labor de la presidenta, un órgano que ha funcionado con un consenso extraordinario a pesar de la polarización política sobre la política educativa que hay en otros ámbitos. Y vamos descendiendo. También las comunidades autónomas tienen estos órganos de consejos escolares hasta que llegamos a los centros educativos, que es un poco el nudo, porque es la raíz de la cual nace todo el esquema o todo de la participación, ¿no? Ahí en los consejos escolares de los centros educativos, desde luego están representados también todos los sectores y están representados también los alumnos. Bueno, esto es la estructura y el para qué o el porqué de esta participación. Primero porque, como dice la Constitución, es un derecho democrático, pero también es un elemento de calidad del sistema educativo. Un sistema educativo no participado no puede ser nunca un sistema de calidad. Pero además, cuando hablamos del alumnado, porque es la verdadera escuela de democracia. Decíamos antes, los valores democráticos solo se aprenden ejerciéndolos. Y esa es nuestra primera escuela de democracia y que marcará pues, el futuro de cuando estamos hablando del alumnado, pues del alumnado. Creo que me toca callarme de momento.
Democracy starts at school, right? It's by practicing it. And I think what we've also heard is teaching and learning and practicing about values and common values, it's actually not value-free, no? And I think quite some of the issues that all of you have been mentioning, whether it's now on gender-related, multicultural, sustainability, and many other items that have been raised, we clearly also see echoes of that in the conversation at the level of the European Union. It's clearly there. And some of you have been using the word indoctrinating and the way of being accused on that. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. There are also those who believe that when you speak about values at the level of the European Union and that you teach about the European dimension, that they say this is propaganda, right? It's the same indoctrination sort of a debate that we also see echoed at this level. I know we have limited time, but I would like to ask you still one question specifically from the level of the EU, and particularly also on the very sensitive subject of the curriculum, the national curriculum. And my question to you is, what can you do and what are you willing to do on the European dimension within your curriculum? Minister, can I start with you?
Yeah, that's an easy one. We include in the topics in our national strategy for citizenship education two topics: democratic institutions and referential for the European dimension of citizenship. And the reason we do that is that we cannot say that we are preparing for active citizenship and having youngsters who are 18-year-olds, and when there are elections, they have no idea what it's not the party they are going to vote for, it's what they are voting for.
Yep.
And this is very important because when we think of the downsliding of democracy, it has to do with lack of knowledge, but it has also to do with something that is very important for our EU discussions. The downsliding is also related to the loss sometimes of one of the biggest assets of the European Union, which is the social state. And inequalities make the downsliding of democracy bigger. And students feel that.
Okay, you're touching a very sensitive but very real subject on that area. In France, Caroline?
Pues en Francia también los valores europeos están en todos los programas, en todos los currículum. No quiero insistir sobre este punto, ya que ya lo dijimos, pero volver sobre esa idea del tema, sobre esa idea del debate. O sea que lo que vimos de manera muy cierta es que se trata de hacer comprender a los alumnos y futuros ciudadanos que Europa no es una administración lejana, algo que muchas veces vuelve en el intercambio con los alumnos, sino que, que está presente de manera muy real en su vida cotidiana, por una parte, y que sobre todo se preocupa por lo que les preocupa. Y así se integra en todos los currículum de las asignaturas, mostrando cómo las cuestiones que emergen y que vienen a unir a todos los jóvenes, lo del desarrollo sostenible, lo del cambio climático, etc., viene también dentro de lo que les enseñamos. Me parece que no todo está en la integración en los currículum de esas cuestiones, sino de permitir el debate abierto sobre esas grandes cuestiones sociales, climáticas y que pueden venir a dividir sin disolver los que nos une, y que así viene como una protección y Europa puede aparecer como una protección democrática de todos los ciudadanos. Bueno, me parece que así se muestra más bien lo que es Europa.
And finally, in Spain, José Manuel.
Sí, estaba ahora recordando en el mes de septiembre, creo recordar, sobre el 23 de septiembre, Ursula von der Leyen, la presidenta, hizo un maravilloso discurso sobre el estado de la Unión Europea. Y decía que teníamos que construir un nuevo relato para Europa, un nuevo relato. Conecto inmediatamente, ese nuevo relato debe empezar en la escuela, debe empezar en la escuela. Y yo creo que además, y cuando hablamos de valores y ciudadanía y lo que hacemos en la escuela, nos referíamos antes a los valores para proteger, porque hemos pasado una serie de crisis y Europa puede sobrevivir a innumerables crisis, los ha sobrevivido en los últimos años, pero difícilmente sobreviviría a una crisis de los valores europeos. Y por tanto, los valores de protección son importantes, pero también los de construcción. Estamos a las puertas de ampliar a 36 miembros nuestra comunidad. Entonces hay valores de protección, pero también valores de construcción, como decía, creo recordar Adela Cortina en su discurso. Por supuesto, en el currículum español, las instituciones europeas, los valores europeos, las directivas europeas, el cómo funciona la Unión Europea, está presente en el currículum. Pero es importante hacerlo, ya digo, desde ese punto de vista competencial, desde ese punto de vista moral, ético, pero también practicando. Y tuvimos una experiencia en Zaragoza, recordarás, donde pusimos, cuando hicimos la última conferencia informal de ministros, pusimos a los alumnos a representar a distintos países y a debatir entre ellos. Fue una experiencia preciosa. Debemos repetirla muy a menudo.
Can I thank you very much for this already? Carmen will take over right now, but I think you have all heard that citizenship education, standing up for the values that we share is a task for every day. And it involves all of us, from the pupil to the teacher, to the administrator, to the politician, to the parents, to the local community. And it's a commitment that has to be made. It's not value-free, but the value is essentially that we have respect for one another and that we are living, actually wanting to live in a just, a fair, and a peaceful environment. And I think, to quote the professor, also to seek a happy life in the way that we wish. Carmen.
Thank you, Mr. Hermans, for conducting this panel in such an engaging and stimulating way. Muito obrigado, Minister. Merci beaucoup, Chief Inspector. Muchas gracias, Secretario de Estado. And we have coffee. Yes, I promise we have coffee. But before we do so, we have a few minutes to ask our panels and also our speakers. So I invite Mr. Ruiz Devesa to come to stage. So you can ask any questions you want as for a few minutes. So please raise your hand and please present yourself before you ask your question.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Piotr Sadowski. I'm Secretary General of Volunteer, but also Vice President of Lifelong Learning Platform. I just wanted to reiterate what João said about the social fabric of our Europe and of our education, because really this is something that we cannot separate from our goals of educating for the future. If we look at the current state of Europe, I come from Poland originally. We have elections in less than 2 weeks' time. It's a crucial election also for a country which is so important actually
for all of us.
in the European Union and how it constructs the fabric of the EU. And João, I have been working with Portugal for a long time, and my colleague Anna also for a long time, on making sure that social justice is retained at this level. And let's not forget that social justice can be very much retained at the educational level, and not always at formal education, but very much at informal and non-formal level, which has been alluded to as well during our conversation. So thank you very much for the contributions from this panel.
Can I say something? Yeah. Well, there was no real question, but I'd like to continue your intervention. We mentioned that, but we didn't have the time to go very deep into this. Citizenship education is challenging because it has to be coherent. There is in our strategy two important features. One is to have project-based learning in citizenship education so that the students act on things, but also a whole school approach. And that's why, I mean, we cannot talk about recycling and then not having the place to recycle. And we know that education is transformative. Recycling is a very good example. I don't know how it was in your countries, but in Portugal, parents started recycling because kids came with the little containers from school. So it is transformative in this way. But coherence is also a big challenge for Europe and for the member states. I cannot be promoting human rights and inclusion in school and then having our borders closed to those who suffer most and need our help. That's incoherence at the highest level, and we fail in educating if we, as governors, as responsibles, as policymakers, are not coherent with what we want to be taught in school.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. Any more questions? Yes, I have seen at the back first, and I think there'll be questions for this time.
Hola, muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos. Me presento. Soy representante de España en la red EPAN. Y quería darles las gracias por el debate tan estimulante y preguntarles una cosa muy concreta. ¿Hay, en principio, alguna idea de plantear una estrategia a nivel europeo para justamente paliar esa sensación o esa acusación de adoctrinamiento que frecuentemente se asocia a la materia de educación para la ciudadanía democrática y en valores democráticos. Dijo la profesora de la Cortina que los valores no se deben imponer, se deben vivir, se ha dicho en el debate, se deben vivir desde luego desde la propia convicción, y es importante en ese sentido que esos valores no se transmitan de modo dogmático y que no den pie o pábulo a esa acusación. Por eso preguntaba, ¿hay alguna estrategia, algún enfoque, alguna perspectiva quizás relacionada con la tradición crítica europea para que pues, esa transmisión de valores se haga desde la convicción, desde el rigor, desde el debate riguroso, para que nadie pueda acusar de estar adoctrinando con esos valores? ¿No sería conveniente plantear una estrategia a nivel europeo para asegurarnos de que el enfoque, la perspectiva desde la cual se implementa la educación ciudadana en Europa evite esa acusación o esa controversia habitual? Muchas gracias.
Okay, so who would like to answer the question?
We're all looking at you.
Yo creo que lo ha explicado bien, lo han explicado bien tanto el ministro da Costa como el secretario de Estado Zendón. La cuestión del adoctrinamiento, del llamado adoctrinamiento, creo que es una forma de despistar la cuestión principal, porque cuando, por ejemplo, estamos proponiendo la dimensión europea en la educación para la ciudadanía, no se está diciendo que no se puede, en el contexto de la enseñanza de esa materia, que por cierto yo creo que está muy bien, la complementariedad entre tener la asignatura y tener la transversalidad, porque antiguamente se proponía solo la transversalidad, pero claro, eso no era suficientemente efectivo, en mi opinión, para garantizar la transmisión de la educación para la ciudadanía. Pero cuando introducimos la dimensión europea en la educación para la ciudadanía, nadie está diciendo que en el contexto, sino todo lo contrario, que en el contexto de una clase sobre esa materia se produzca un debate y un enfoque crítico también sobre la Unión Europea, sobre lo que está haciendo bien, sobre lo que no está haciendo bien, sobre lo que tendría que estar haciendo y no estar haciendo. Por tanto, el enfoque es formativo, es informativo y es crítico. Y en ese sentido, en el espacio educativo, tal y como se ha descrito, participado también por la comunidad, todo está abierto al debate y a la crítica. Y en ese sentido no veo que haya espacio para el adoctrinamiento. También por la dimensión práctica que ha enfatizado mucho el secretario de Estado y que yo comparto. Cuando uno participa, y me ha hecho recordar, no sé si llamar el inicio de mi carrera política, me ha hecho recordar que yo fui miembro del Consejo Escolar de mi centro educativo. Y eso es educación para la ciudadanía. Ser delegado de clase, ser miembro del Consejo Escolar del centro educativo, participar en una clase de debate, eso es educación para la ciudadanía. Participar en una actividad de trabajo social o voluntariado en el centro educativo, también es educación para la ciudadanía. Por tanto, todos esos elementos más el espacio lectivo orientan hacia la formación efectiva de ciudadano, pero también con un enfoque y una mentalidad crítica.
Thank you. We have time for a very, very short question and a very, very short answer.
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias. Mi nombre es Irune Aguirrezábal, de la Organización de Estados Iberoamericanos. Hablaré en español. En primer lugar, muchas felicidades a la presidencia española y a todos los organismos presentes por la importancia de esta conferencia, tema que ya fue debatido en la reunión ministerial informal hace 2 semanas en Zaragoza. Es un tema que creo que es importante que preocupe a la Unión Europea, al Consejo de Europa y a todas las entidades que estamos aquí, pero sobre todo el mensaje más importante creo que es el de Adela, el pasar del discurso a la acción, el hacer verdaderamente una apuesta por una acción política integral que permita que pasemos a bueno, por poner a disposición todos los recursos necesarios para que la educación para la ciudadanía sea algo de futuro. A la vez que estamos debatiendo aquí, me parece interesante comentar que la presidencia española también está celebrando una importante conferencia en Madrid sobre memoria democrática. Es decir, es el mismo tema, el pasado, estamos hablando del presente y nos jugamos el futuro. Desde la OI estamos a disposición para trabajar y, bueno, con la mejor disposición para poder aportar en lo que es la educación para la ciudadanía, no solamente la educación formal e informal, sino también en crear esos role models, esos ejemplos de los que nos hablaba Adela Cortina, que son tan importantes en la política, en la medicina, en el profesorado, en fin, en todas las profesiones. Sin más, nada, solo quería aportar eso. Gracias.
So thank you for this intervention. I think it's the perfect moment to continue discussing about all this over a well-deserved coffee break, which will take place just next door. And I would like you to come back to reconvene by 10 to 12. So we have some time for coffee, and in which you can also network and recharge. So thank you very much, and I'll see you here at 10 to 12. A las 12 menos 10, por favor, volvemos con más sesiones muy interesantes para el resto de la jornada.